Great. Okay. So what we're gonna look at today principally is family law. And this is family law that comes from very ancient traditions. And I will say that you may find it upsetting. I certainly find it upsetting. I would remind you that the Torah is part of the ancient world, that these laws are not dissimilar from other ancient laws, and that, like other things in the Torah, they go through a great deal of development within the rabbinic period and up to, actually, in some cases, up to modern times. So let's understand them in their context. Now, having said that, we're going to start with some laws of marriage. This is verse 13. If a man takes a woman and cohabitates with her, the Hebrew word is ki yikach, which it says marries, but literally it means take. People say take to wife. This is a kind of transaction, and it's the male who does it and the female who accepts it. And classically, of course, you can think about that as the man giving the woman a ring and the woman accepting the ring. Marriage in ancient times and in Jewish law was always something that men did. A woman could not marry a man would marry a woman, and she had the right to accept his proposal or not, and to marry him or not. And there are many within Orthodox community who would say that you cannot have a double ring ceremony, right? Because that would not look like him marrying her. It would also look like her marrying him, and that would be a violation of what the Torah seems to indicate. Today, double ring ceremonies are widespread, and there's another twist. Is everybody muted? Because I hear some background noise. If you're not muted, please mute, and hopefully that will take care of it. Okay, so a man gives a woman an object of value according to rabbinic law, and she becomes his wife. But it is he who initiates it. I mentioned double ring ceremonies. I'll tell you a story about this, and then sort of something that sort of happened in contemporary terms. So my son, Aryeh, married Yael, who comes from a Haredi family. Her father was not happy about me being the one who did the ceremony as a conservative rabbi, but he acquiesced. And he had only one concern, in that she not give him a ring, because he felt that that was a violation of this. And so the wedding takes place, and we're under the chuppah, and Aryeh gives Yael a ring, and he says the formula, and I slip her a ring, and she puts it on her father's and on Aryeh's finger, and nothing is said. And her father never mentioned it, because, in fact, much of his concern was visual, that the people in his community would see this and therefore feel that there was something wrong with the wedding. So the question is, when a man gives a woman a ring, there's a formula, he says. And the formula is, you are now betrothed to me as my wife in accordance with the laws of Moses and the people of Israel. That's the formula. He says it, and he gives her the ring, and that is part of what affects the marriage. if she gives him a ring, does she say anything? Becomes another question, right? And traditionally, but within Ellen Aryeh's case, she didn't say anything. That would have been more problematic. Traditionally, when double ring ceremonies got started, the bride might say nothing, or she might recite a verse. Most typically, Ani l'dodi v'dodi li, all right, from the Song of Songs, I am my beloved's and my beloved. Not in accordance with the laws of Moses and Israel, which seem to be a stretch. And then in more recent times, women are exactly saying, you are consecrated to me according to the laws of Moses and the people of Israel. So there's been something of an evolution. But here we are in the biblical period. Men are doing it. Women are accepting it, no question. So he marries her. And then uva alecha, he comes upon her. That is to say, they have sexual intercourse. And then he takes an aversion to her, right? Doesn't say exactly what, but the Hebrew is quite strong, right? Usnea, sinea, he hates her, right? Love is turned into hatred. And now he, beyond that, Visam Allah alilat devarim, and he makes up charges about her, Bahotzi alecha shemra, and he gives her literally a bad name. He defames her. So he doesn't like her anymore. He doesn't want her anymore. And he makes claims about her. And it's significant. He does this publicly. He's not just even just talking to his family. I made a mistake. I shouldn't. Right. So what happens in this case? He's defaming her, and what is the nature of the defamation? I married this woman. When I approached her, I found she wasn't a virgin. So he says, I thought I was marrying a virgin. She's not a virgin. She shouldn't not have been a virgin. And therefore, I want to get rid of her, right? He hates her. Does he hate her because of her lack of virginity? It doesn't appear so. But he wants to use it as a reason for him to be able to get rid of her. So why doesn't he just divorce her? That would be simple and easy. And in biblical times, men could divorce their wives, and they really didn't have a lot of recourse. Divorce later on has to be, in Jewish law, has to be mutual, but here there's no real recourse. But what's the kicker? The kicker is that he has to pay her. He has to pay her ketubah. A ketubah, though we think of it as a document which is used symbolically in a wedding, right, was originally in part the terms of the marital settlement that a man would have to pay his wife if they got divorced. Alimony, if you will, right? It's enough that she could live independently because she's no longer married. She can't really go back to her father's house necessarily, and so he has to pay the ketubah. So he doesn't want to do this, apparently. He wants to get rid of her. He's saying all kinds of terrible things about her, and he specifically said she wasn't a virgin. In such a case, the girl's father and mother shall produce evidence of the girl's virginity before the elders of the town at the gate. And the gate of the town, as you probably recall, is where all judicial matters are decided. So this is a kind of suit that's being brought. The elders are the judges. And Jewish law later on, as it develops, and perhaps even reflects original practice, is that there have to be witnesses. It can't just be that there's some, blood, there's lack of a bloody cloth. She has to have been warned that she shouldn't have gone with Mr. So-and-so before she got married. There has to be a whole judicial procedure. Witnesses have to come and testify. And her parents need to produce some evidence of her virginity at the time that she got married. And the girl's father says, I gave this man my daughter to wife, but he has taken an aversion to her. So he has made up charges and said, I did not find your daughter a virgin. Here, though, is evidence of my daughter's virginity, and they spread out the cloth before the elders. So he comes literally with this cloth, which shows that she bled in the marital intercourse. And Jewish law emphasizes it doesn't have to be the cloth itself. It could be any evidence that they could produce that she was a virgin. And the elders of the town, so they demonstrate actually that he was just using this and defaming her, and he gets a threefold punishment. The elders of the town will take the man and flog him. So he gets beaten, and they fine him 100 shekels of silver and gives it to the girl's father. This is probably twice what the original dowry was. So he's going to have to pay heavily. And for he has defamed a virgin in Israel among the Jewish people. And moreover, she will remain his wife, and he will never have the right to divorce her. So threefold penalty, right? Flogging, money, and no possibility of divorce. The last one, no possibility of divorce, is, in some sense, she's now locked in, right? And that seems unfair. And in later Jewish law, she has the right to refuse this. She has the right to go out to receive a divorce if he is willing to give it to her. But here the idea really is, our assumption is that he wants to divorce her, right? And he doesn't want to pay. He wants to divorce her. And so this would be a disincentive for him. Now, not only won't he be able to avoid paying the ketubah, but in fact, he can't do anything to get rid of this woman who he hates. Again, though, one feels for her, who's locked into this situation. But the idea of these three separate penalties is clearly to keep someone from doing this. Okay. Now, if the charge proves true and she was found not to have been a virgin, then she should be brought out to the entrance of her father's house, and she is stoned to death, for she did a shameful thing in Israel, committing fornication while under her father's authority, to sweep away the evil from your midst. Right. So, couple of things about this. The biblical text puts a huge premium on virginity, though, of course, a woman whose husband has died can remarry. In ancient biblical law, a divorced woman can remarry. So it's under these specific circumstances where the assumption was she was a virgin. All of this goes by the wayside later on, all of it. And in fact, in Jewish law, as down to us first through the Talmud and the medieval period, an unmarried who sleeps together is not viewed as doing a terrible sin. Certainly not the kind of thing where a woman would be executed. it's not like adultery. Adultery is an extremely, as we're going to see shortly, extremely serious. But unmarried sex, it's called snoot, promiscuous. Yes. So I think that's worth bearing in mind, but that's not the biblical view. It doesn't stay that way, but it's not the biblical. Okay, so before we go on, I do want to open things up if anyone has a question about this opening. Questions or comments? Saul.
The fact that he can't divorce her after the father pays him the money, I don't understand that. Why do they say that? I mean, he didn't like her from the very beginning. Apparently, what I'm reading from the Hertz is, and hate her, the man had entered marriage strictly merely for the satisfaction of his passions, and then turned against his wife by a revulsion of feeling.
Yes.
Frequent in such characters. So
right. So why would you force this woman into staying in this marriage with this guy who hates her? And why should he be stuck married to a woman that he deeply doesn't like? Right. And as I tried to explain, this is, I think, the strongest way. These three punishments are a strong way of trying to keep a husband from making these kinds of claims. Right, from publicly defaming her, from claiming that she was not, she tricked him, whatever the claim is. You better be very careful making that kind of claim. Right? Now, he could have just divorced her, right? But he doesn't want to do that. He just wants to get rid of her, and the Torah is working hard here within the context of the times to keep people from making those sorts of claims, unless they have pure Sandy, or you're scratching your head, I can't tell which. Unmute, please.
No, you were finishing your sentence, so I put my hand down. Did you?
Go ahead.
You're saying something. Okay. It reminds me in a vague way, because they weren't married. King David's children, Tamar and what was his? I can't think of the man.
Amnon.
Sorry.
Amnon is his name.
Yeah, he had to have her.
Thanks, Dave.
He hated her.
Yes. Yeah, that's a class, and she's his sister, which is a whole other level, right? Yes. His lust, right, immediately turns into hatred. Probably because it starts with self-hatred, and he's all, it seems like in that story, it seems like the real turn on was the illicit nature of the relationship. But for whatever reason, yes, this sounds like that kind of situation. Carol.
Isn't this kind of a preview of when a man today doesn't want to give his wife a divorce?
Yes,
and
I think it is. And so he doesn't want to do it because for whatever reason, and that becomes extremely problematic, right? So here he literally can't. Okay. Anything, Hannah?
Yeah. Was there monogamy at this time?
No.
So,
and so
I mean, he could have just found someone else at that.
Just found someone else, and now he has to support her. Right. So again, one gets the sense that a lot of this is financial, right? Yes, he could presumably go somewhere else, and it's actually interesting that the ban on polygamy among Ashkenazic Jews, which goes back to Rabbeinu Gershom, who had an edict that Jews couldn't be bigamous, really at its root had to do with that kind of situation. A man who will completely neglect his wife and simply marry someone else. right? So in order to prevent that, Rabbeinu Gershon says you can't have more than one wife. You're going to have a divorce. You're going to pay her settlement, and then you're free to marry someone else. Okay.
It would seem the wealthier people would be able to have several wives.
Yes, that is true. I would also mention the fact that there's very little evidence beyond the biblical period of polygamy. It does not seem to have been widespread, at least among Ashkenazic Jews. You look at the rabbis in the Talmud, you don't see people with more than one wife. There may be one or two exceptions, but in general, it wasn't practiced, but it certainly could have been. And among Sfardim, up till modern times, you did have people, you have these stories of people who come to Israel, magic carpet, and they come with their wives. Seems to was much more prevalent in that community. Okay, good. So now we're now turning to verse 22, and we get adultery, right? If a man sleeps with a woman who is the wife of another man, both of them shall die, right? So this is adultery. The punishment for adultery is death. It is fundamental in the Bible that marriage has to be respected. There are three, if you want to call them cardinal sins in Judaism, for which a person should accept death rather than violate them. In other words, if somebody puts a gun to your head and they say, do this, rather than do that, you should accept martyrdom. And this is one of them. There's also public idolatry and murder, right? Someone says, kill him or I'll kill you. You're not allowed to think that your blood is somehow redder than his blood, right? And there's long Talmudic discussions about this, and does it really apply and how it applies. But it's clear that this is absolutely fundamental. We have it right there in the Ten Commandments, of course, right? It's very basic, and both of them, this adulterous couple, are, at least in the view of the Bible, to be put to death. Okay, now we get a situation where they're kind of married, kind of not married, right? In the case of a virgin who is engaged to a man, if a man comes upon her in town and lies with her, so here we have a woman, she's engaged, but engagement is a very serious business. In fact, if you look at Jewish wedding ceremonies today, they have two parts. The first part essentially is engagement, and then the second part is marriage. We just join them together, but in antiquity, they were often separated by a long period of time. Person would become engaged. They wouldn't quite have the wherewithal to set up an independent house, but they were tied to each other and had made this promise to get married, and that is an extremely serious promise. So they're in that situation where she is mi'urasa, right? That's the category that she's in. In modern Hebrew, we refer to that first stage of the wedding as erusin, engagement, from this word mi'orasa, and then the second part is called kiddushin, which is actually the marriage itself. Erusin is the giving of the ring. Not yet married, but extremely close as you can get to being married without sleeping together, right? And then we get the rest in antiquity, they were separated. Okay, so now someone finds her and he rapes her. That's what we're talking about. And the idea is the two of them now are to be executed, which is shocking and very difficult, right? But she was close enough to being married that it's like a case of adultery. But what's worse here is that one assumes that adultery is consensual. And here, we don't know. Is she, this engaged woman, just, having a last fling before she's officially married? Or has she been raped? So the assumption of the text, is you'll see, is that she's been raped. So the two of them are stoned. Why the girl? Because she did not cry out for help in the town, and the man because he violated another person's wife, though the word wife here is not quite accurate. In other words, the assumption here is she's the victim of rape. She is in a place where if she cried out, people would hear her. Right? And so in that place where she could have cried out and been rescued, she didn't. Assumption then is, well, it's not exactly rape. That's the assumption. Now, this runs against, I think, deeply against our modern sensibilities. And we know that sometimes women who are raped don't cry out. They can be traumatized. They can be silent. They can be coerced. Right? There are a whole variety of reasons. I think this is one of the most troubling verses in the Torah. But I have to say, it reflects a different world. And, as they say, it is what it is. However, if he comes upon the girl engaged in the open country and he lies with her, only the man shall die. And you'll do nothing to the girl. She does not incur the death penalty, because in this case is like that of a man attacking another one and murdering him. He came upon her in the open, though the engaged girl cried for help. There was no one to save her, right? So the assumption here is she could have cried out. We're giving her the benefit of the doubt. It wouldn't have mattered, right? So if she's in a circumstance, and it doesn't have to be in town versus in the country, if she's in a circumstance where we could reasonably assume that she could have cried out and been heard, that's a problem. If she's in a circumstance, she's in an empty house with no one around, could be in town, but there's no possibility that we could say, and I think it goes further than that. I could say there's no assumption that even if she cried out, she would have been heard. Okay, so we have this distinction. Do these laws also disappear? But here, right, it is. I'm struck by, in the Eitz Chaim, just a little comment on verse 24. The reader may balk at the Torah's assumption that a woman's not crying out indicated consent. We know that intimidation and coerced silence may take many forms. It's a simple sentence, but I think it speaks a great deal. Okay. Now we get a woman who is not engaged. Right, so we started out with a married woman, and they're both punished, done. Now we have an engaged woman, and well, it depends where and what. And here we get a virgin who is not engaged, and he seizes her and he lies with her, and they are discovered. He has to pay her father 50 shekels, and she becomes his wife. Because he violated her, he can never have the right to divorce her, right? So here, again, we don't really know what happened. it says he grabbed her and had sex with her. And so what's the consequence? Well, the consequence is that he has to pay the marriage price, and he's married to her, and can never divorce her. Like the other case that we looked at, this presumably indicates that, see, here's the problem. We're in a society in which women have very little protection, right? And once it becomes known that she went through this, her ability to find another man, another husband, is seriously impacted. Can she go back to her father's house? Can she not go back to her father's house? So this remedy, which seems really extreme and unfair, is, though she's been raped, it becomes a kind of way of protecting her. Though it's horrific to think that a woman is forced here to marry her rapist. And rabbinic law says she can refuse, her father can refuse. She doesn't have to do this, but it seems to be a way of giving her some measure of protection and perhaps some disincentive to this rapist, who will actually, the consequence of it for him is that he won't just get this moment of pleasure or domination or whatever it is he wants, but actually it will have lifelong consequences. Okay, so I'm going to open it up again. If you have questions, comments, yeah, go ahead, Marilyn. Marilyn, you're muted. Marilyn, I can't hear you. You're muted. Good.
If you would tell us what page we're on.
Sure. Yes, so we've just finished. We're actually at the beginning of chapter 23, and we're going to begin with verse 1122. That's where we are. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Barry.
Well, there does not seem to be any prohibition against a man visiting a prostitute.
We'll come to that.
There we go. Okay.
Yes. But yes, it is, I would say there is something to be said for that. We have the classic case of Judah and Tamar in the book of Genesis. So Tamar, Judah has 3 sons. The first one dies. The second one dies. And because of the rules of Levirate marriage, which we are going to come to, but the idea is if the brother dies, the woman should marry his brother, the brother of the deceased, so that his line can continue and the children will be considered his children. So this happens twice. And now Tamar, who is the woman, the wife of the first one, the wife of the second one, now we come to the third one, and Judah does not want to give his third son to Tamar. He doesn't want the third son to marry Tamar, even though that's the law and the rule. So he puts her off. Well, go eventually, maybe. And she goes and she mourns. She's wearing widow's garments, and it's clear that Judah is not going to do what he's supposed to do. So what does Tamar do? She takes off these widow's garbs. She dresses herself up. She goes to a crossroads near where Judah is involved with the sheep shearing, right? She knows where he is. And she decks herself out as a prostitute. Since he won't give her to the man who he's supposed to. And Judah, there doesn't seem to be any moral problem with this. Judah goes, he says, oh, yeah. And he makes the deal. And, you know, she wants to be paid. And he says, well, I'll send you payment. And she says, well, you know, I need some sort of surety. This is all the negotiations before. And she gets his ring and something else. And eventually, he comes back later because he wants to get his stuff back and give her what he promised her. And she's gone. And he says, where's that woman? He said to the local people, you know, the prostitute who works over on the corner there. Where is she? And they say, we don't know what you're talking about. There is no prostitute who works that corner. And eventually Tamar becomes pregnant. And Judah, you know, sees this is a real way to get rid of her, and he wants her executed. And she goes to him and she says, well, actually, it was the man whose ring and signet this is who got me pregnant. And he realizes that she has pushed him into doing essentially what he was supposed to do, only instead of his son, it's with him. And that's the end of the story. It's a great story, and it has all kinds of interesting implications and commentaries. And since we're reading the book of Genesis in shul at this point, I recommend that you go and take a look at it. But my whole reason for bringing this up, of course, is to say, doesn't seem to be a problem with prostitution, right? There's no sense here that Judah, you know, he was having a good time and he saw this prostitute. Sure. The other example is Rahab. Not a Jewish woman, but she is this woman who lives in the gates of Jericho. You know, the scouts come to her house, the scouts who were sent by Joshua, 2 scouts. This is before the war and the walls of Jericho fall down and so on. 2 scouts go in. And we're going to see this when we get to the book of Joshua. And she hides them. She protects them. Because the king of Jericho is after them. And she's viewed in an extremely positive light. Extremely positive. Despite the fact that she is this prostitute. Now, it's interesting that attitudes change. Prostitution is not looked on in this kind of way later in Jewish law. And so you have Rashi, right, medieval Jewish commentator, who says she's called a zona. Zona is a prostitute. But he uses the word, he reads the root, not as prostitute, but from the word zon, which is to feed people, right? And he says, no, she was an innkeeper. Right? Because he's troubled by the idea that a prostitute, right? Because in that period in France, in medieval France, the idea that this woman is somehow righteous, despite her profession, is is not something that Rashi is comfortable with. And he finds a clever way of dealing with it. Okay, so a very long answer to a short question, but that is what it is. Okay, any other questions about this before we?
Francesca, I have a question. Well, it's actually, that was one of my questions, was about what about prostitution? But the other thing is, you know, that I'm a clinical as well as forensic psychologist, and I co-led a sex offenders group when I was working at Rollway Prison. And one of the excuses, it's just by way of context, that men would say, well, if she didn't scream, she must have wanted it. But there's also the other part, which is, what if they said, they threatened, which frequently happened with these guys, because they would tell me that if you scream, I'm going to kill you and your whole family, or some threat, and that it's so they put total culpability in the Bible on the women, as opposed to responsibility for the misbehavior.
Yes, absolutely right.
I'm being a troublemaker. I apologize.
It's deeply troubling. I hear the gardener outside my window. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, cannot hear them, only you. It's good.
All right.
I'm going back on mute.
So we'll move on. Chapter 23. And here we get the case. We've been looking at adultery, things look like adultery, rape, and we're still in this general area. And no man shall marry his father's former wife.
Just want to see.
So as to remove his father's garment. Seems like a strange.
It's not 75, it's a big one.
So first of all, the Hebrew here is simply lo yikach ish et eshet aviv. He cannot marry his father's wife. So clearly, it can't be his mother, right? Because he can't marry his mother. That's incest. Done. So it has to be his father's wife, who's not his mother, right? And she is no longer his father's wife, right? Whether she was divorced or his father now died or whatever the situation is, she's not his mother. She was married to his father. She's no longer married to his father. So you could say, what's the problem? It's not adultery. The Bible here says no. Torah says no, because he is, it is removing his father's garment, which is somehow a euphemism for some kind of sexual.
Rabbi Walflesh, he's still doing the Bible studies.
I think on the schedule, on the schedule.
Marilyn, if you can hear me, mute, but if you can't, you can't. Okay, so, and this language of uncovering his father's garment, there in the book of Leviticus, there's a whole long list of things that are considered incestuous relationships. This is the language that's.
We only have one Boba? Yeah, three. Yeah, only three left. Yeah, four in there. That's good. Okay.
The language which is usually used. And so there is this sense of somehow this is unseemly. Somehow being together, sleeping with the woman who your father slept with is a little too close. It's a little bit, I mean, one can imagine, what's going through her mind, what's going through his mind, this idea that we need to keep, it's not incest, but it's a little bit like it, maybe somehow. And so the Torah says, no, you can't do that. Now, I have to say, I'm currently studying a section of the Talmud which deals with this kind of thing. And the rabbis are quite fanciful. So there's a rabbinic interpretation, not of this verse, but of one in Leviticus, that you can't sleep with your wife's mother or her grandmother. Well, I don't know what, how that really, wow. I'll just leave it there. The rabbis are really, kind of like, it's clear that their analysis of these verses is for the sake of analyzing these verses, because it's hard to believe that they're real world cases that correspond. But I guess, people do what they do, and maybe they had at that time, they all got married young. I don't know. Anyway, okay. So now we get a variety of laws about entering the congregation of the Lord, Kahal Adonai, right? So it's not quite clear what the congregation of the Lord is. And there are a couple of possibilities. One is that Kahal Adonai is a legislative body, that it is the congregational leadership of the people of Israel. And certainly some passages which refer to it seem to indicate that. The other possibility is it's simply the Jewish people, that the people as a whole are God's congregation. And as you might know, the Hebrew word for a synagogue community is kehillah. In fact, the conservative movement decided a while ago that we don't refer to synagogues as congregations anymore. We refer to them as kehilot, which the word kehillah could refer to all kinds of things. Any assembly of Jews in prayer. It might just be a minyan, it could be a congregation, it could be a whole host of other things. That decision probably reflects changes in modern Jewish life and the idea of trying to incorporate a variety of different kinds of communities within the rubric of conservative Judaism. So we don't know really what Kahal Adonai is. And the first law is really quite strange, and I don't really understand it. I'll just read it. So, a person whose testes are crushed or whose member is cut off should not be admitted to the congregation. Right? So, this is clearly not someone who is born this way, right? Or even according to rabbinic law, someone for whom this is accidental. But the way the rabbis read this is a person who did this to themselves. And I think that represents the rabbinic world and the fact that in the Greco-Roman world, people did remove the marks of circumcision in order to do a variety of things and to be accepted, because there were many circumstances in which in ancient Roman times people were naked. They were naked in the arena, they were naked in the bathhouse, a whole host of ways that Jews would obviously look Jewish, and those who were assimilating would do these things. So the rabbis want to read it that way. What the Torah means and why the Torah wants to exclude them is really unclear. I don't know more to say than that. We see from the laws that are going to follow that in general, the idea of being admitted into the congregation of Israel or being allowed to seems to have to do with marrying Jews. That seems to, now here it's, maybe this is because the marriage can't be consummated, if we want to read it that way. And therefore, they can't marry into the Jewish community, maybe, who knows? But if we look at the things that are going to follow, I'm going to stop here because the following one, I think we only have, well, I'll go a little further. We still have 7 minutes, so I'll go just slightly further. Now we get the case of the mamzer. It's translated as misbegotten, but a mamzer is not admitted to the congregation of the Lord, nor his descendants, even to the 10th generation. Right? So, what's a mamzer? A mamzer is the offspring of a couple that could not marry. Not that they were fundamentally not allowed to marry, and if they did, so there are two kinds of groups of people who can't marry, right? There is, for example, in biblical law, a Kohen, right, can't marry a Grusha, a divorcee. Right? And there are lots of reasons for that, and I'm not going to talk about it, except to say that if a Kohen and a Grusha get married, they're married. right? They shouldn't have done it, but there's no question that the marriage is valid. A mumser is the offspring of a relationship which by definition can't be valid. And there are two cases. One is an incestuous union, and the other is an adulterous union. So that's what we're talking about. The idea that such a person cannot enter the community clearly has to do with marriage. That is, that a mumser cannot marry another Jew, except two things. Except another mumser.
I don't know what I did with
That
the.
would be one. And then the other would be someone who had converted and become Jewish. They can marry such a person. Now, this is very troubling in itself, like a lot of the laws here, because this is an innocent. This person did not do anything except happen to be married, happen to be born from parents who did something. And it seems very unfair. You know, there's a classic verse that children should not be punished for the sins of their parents. We have it in Deuteronomy, right? Here, it seems like they are. There seems to be some concern about bloodlines here. The Sephardim actually have very, very strong, to this day, are very concerned with bloodlines. There's an expression among Sephardim, Sephardi tahor, pure Sephardi. This is someone who can trace his bloodlines back in the among the Sephardic community for generations, and to be able to show that there's no one but Sephardim among his ancestors. Right? This idea of the sort of the purity of the bloodline may have something to do with this. And so this person is not excluded from marriage, and they're not excluded from being Jews. They are Jews in every other respect, except there are certain people they can't marry. And I emphasize that they're Jews in every other respect because there's a famous statement in the Talmud that if you have someone who is teaching, but is not a fit teacher, and you have a mumser who is a fit teacher, you should learn from the mumser, right? This idea that this person is learned and their Torah is good and people, so it's not about somehow excluding them from the community. They don't get ostracized, they don't get sent off, but there are certain people they can't marry. I'll say one more thing about this, and that is one of the reasons why Jewish community is so, I'm talking about the observant Jewish community, is so concerned with a couple who gets divorced. They want to make sure that even if there's civil divorce, there's also religious divorce, that the husband gives his wife a get, because in Jewish law, if he doesn't give her a get, she's still married to him. And if she's still married to him, and now she goes on and marries someone else because she was civilly divorced, the child of that second marriage is a mumser, because she has committed adultery, not in the eyes of the state, but in the eyes of Jewish law, which required a Jewish divorce to end a Jewish marriage. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I welcome your questions in our last few minutes. Sandy, go ahead.
Yes.
So there's a line in the Torah about.
It's on heat. So whatever heat you want it
I'm
on.
trouble hearing you, Sandy.
I know, because Marilyn, can you mute Marilyn?
Marilyn, can you mute? All right, let me see if I can. Yeah, I can. Okay,
So,
go ahead.
so there's a line in the Torah that the sins of the father should not be visited upon the sons, and the sins of the sons shall not be visited upon the fathers, which contradicts the mamzer, right?
Yes, it seems to. It certainly is, and I think that's one of the reasons why this is troubling. I would, though, point it out that this is in biblical terms, this is a limitation more than it's a punishment. I'm not justifying, but a person is simply limited in terms of the scope of who they can marry, and that is a kind of punishment, but it's not really a severe punishment from the point of view of the Torah itself. And we see another example of that, by the way, the daughters of Zelophehad, right? We have this very famous story of the Numbers. They inherit their fathers. They're women, they go to Moses goes to God says they're right, they should be able to inherit, even though they're women. And then people from their tribe come and they complain and they say, if they've inherited and then they go marry a guy from another tribe, the land in our tribe will be lost. And so the law comes and it says, well, yes, they can inherit, but they have to marry within their tribe. Right? Which is a little bit, right? There's a limitation placed on who a person can marry. Okay, anything else? Yeah, Barry, go ahead, and then Saul.
So, so my wife and I were married, under the conservative law, and that marriage is not recognized universally by particularly Orthodox community.
Yes.
Does that community consider our marriage forbidden? Would they consider our children to be
They don't
mamzers?
They don't
In some
consider
sense,
the marriage forbidden, but they consider it that certain things with respect to marriage do not apply. And by the way, that in some ways can be viewed positively. There's a modern Orthodox decisive, very well known, Moshe Feinstein, one of the great rabbis of the 20th century, encouraged people in a case like that, and then there's a refusal to give a get. They're looking for some reason to disqualify the marriage so that there won't be a need for a get. And they look to things like that, or the question of the witnesses. But as a matter of fact, since one more thing, there are 3 ways to get married, and one of them is through sex, sort of common law marriage. If a couple sleeps together with the understanding that they do this because they're married, it's the wedding night, as it were, that according to most sources, that's enough to marry them. That's not to say everybody's going to buy that, but it seems to be the law. Anything else? Saul, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'm not sure about this, but the word, the second verse, velo yavo patsua daka. I think in Mishpatim that refers to they can't be involved in any sacrifices or anything like that. I'm not sure.
Yes, but they're talking. Yes, you're quite right. But they're talking about a Kohen.
Oh, okay.
Just as the animal, the sacrificial animal, has to be without blemish, so too the one that offers it. So in a way, yes, but in a way, no. Anything else? Okay. One last thing, actually 2 last things. One is Sandy mentioned, I mentioned last time, if you were interested in Elisha ben Abuya, who was this guy who became a heretic as a result of somebody who was fulfilling the mitzvah of sending the mother bird away and who died. I mentioned that Milton Steinberg wrote a really great book called As a Driven Leaf. Sandy sent me an email. She said, you can get that on Amazon. And in fact, if you get it on Kindle, it's about $5, something like that. So you might want to read it. It's a great book. Secondly, last year, some of you were good enough to sponsor this class, and if you would like to do that, I figured out that over the course of the year, if you would like to do it, you send anything you want, and you don't have to. I'll send information to you with the notice about the class. But over the course of the year, figuring out how many sessions we have, if you were to contribute $180 to sponsoring the class, it's about $4 a class. So I would welcome that. It's not required. I'd love to have you regardless. Please don't leave. But if you want to, that's my recommendation. And I welcome your sponsorship if you want, and I will send that off. I will send off information about where you might do that. So that's about it. Walter, it's good to see you. I just mentioned to you, I sent you an email. I hope you saw it. And we should talk about your book. So just reply to the email. We'll find the right time to talk. All right, everybody, have a great week. And God willing, I'll see you all next Tuesday.